we got to get into the Word now. And so we are talking through a series called Global Gospel. And it's an exciting series to be in because it's one that talks about the unity of diversity. You've already talked about this concept even just last week. The main point that Zeb had was to the fact that we had not a monocultural church. Church was never meant to be monocultural. It was meant to be multicultural. And this means a lot to me because it's the unity of diversity. I come from a family, right now the intimate family that I have is just my wife and my two younger brothers. My wife, her name is Annie, and my brother, his name is Cruz, and my other brother name is Angel. And right now that's the family that we have. And so the fact that you've made the point already at your church to acknowledge the sheer fact that everyone is welcome here regardless of your ethnicity, your nation, your creed, even what your family looks like. I come from a very blended family. My brothers and I each have different dads. It's not the nuclear family. Sometimes we feel out of place. We feel like we are an incomplete version of family, and yet when I get to come to places like this, it feels like I'm part of a family once again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And upon the sentiment of it being Father's Day, none of our fathers on my family are still around, and so I get to point to my Heavenly Father and say, He's still here.
That's right.
And so I just was so encouraged. I feel so welcomed by you to have made such a point, for us to build off of that point. If you believe that that is the truth, what's next? What's next? Now, I was excited because I think of church as a big family or a big team. And if that's the case, a good family, a good team has a mission in mind that we're moving towards. And my first claim, my biggest claim today, is that church in and of itself is a diverse movement of God. We've got the diversity point, but today we're talking about the fact that we're on the move. Yeah. So where are we headed? What do we have? What resources do we have to make this journey together? And so we're going to dive into this through two different points. The first of which is the wonder of the church. And I'm going to ask you to look around for the wonder of Odyssey Church. The second is to wander as a church. Where are we headed as a church? Keep the mission in mind. Now I'll ask you to consider, do you acknowledge that Odyssey Church is a diverse movement of God? It's easy to forget that sometimes. Odyssey Church is a movement of God. If you look back, Zeb was just talking about it, to the very beginning, Zeb, a team of people, were utterly convinced by God to go and launch a church. That is a movement of God. Odyssey Church is a movement of God. And now, what that community looks like is a diverse movement. But as we explore and as we wander, what else is revealed? Well, I'll ask you, what is Odyssey Church? Is it this building? Well, no, this building's a school, right? Is Odyssey Church Zeb? No. Zeb wouldn't take that upon himself, thank God. What is Odyssey Church? You are Odyssey Church. What does that feel like? What does that make you think of? You are Odyssey Church. And if that's the case, as we explore and as we wander, what that actually means that we're exploring today is you. We're talking about you today. Yeah. You are the church. So who are you? Well, fortunately, you have it written down on your website. I've been doing a little bit of research. I've hung out here a couple times and been taking tips from Zeb here and there, and so I wanted to see what does this church self-define as. And you've got a wonderful quote on your website. It says, "We are a community of people from various cultures and backgrounds who are united in discovering the way of Jesus and practicing His teachings." Now, where you're at with that, again, makes me excited. It reminds me actually of the earliest part of the church in the New Testament. We have this example of church and what it looks like at the very beginning in the book of Acts. And at this point, there was a group of just over 100 people or so gathered in a room, expecting God to move, seeking to be obedient. And what did God do? Well, upon His timing, as they asked Him to show up, He did show up. And it just so happened to be the case that there were people in the public nearby that bore witness to God moving through that gathering. And then those people were even more obedient to say, okay, we're going to go connect with them, share what we've seen, share our faith, reveal who God is. And 3,000 more people to that 100-person or so group were added just on that day. And now, you've already gathered, so what's next? Acts really inspires us. It should inspire us to go, what can God do through us? What should we expect? What I think is really beautiful in the writings of the early followers of Jesus after that is observations of different patterns of how God moves. And so that's why I've chosen the scripture today, and written by Paul, an early follower of Jesus, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. We're going to read through verses 4 through 7, and then we're going to skip to 11. Now, what Paul is talking about here is, it seems to be he's observing a case of disunity in the church that is in Corinth. People are separating, and Paul's trying to say, whoa, it's okay that you're a little bit different here and there. That's fine. It's actually the unity of diversity that we should acknowledge that continues moving us forward as a movement of God. And I would acknowledge too, I'm skipping some verses, but it's with intentionality. If we were to get into the details today of the list of verses, a list of things from verse 8 through 10, I would dive a little bit too deep, and the message today would be about 4 hours long. And as Zeb said, you got to end the message at some point, so it's only going to be 3 hours. So we'll just set you up for that. But with that being said, let's rehash what was already read regarding 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 7, and then 11. Paul writes, "There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one it is the same God at work. Now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good." And we've got verses 8 through 10. These are a list of unique skills and talents bestowed upon people by God, otherwise known as gifts. Finally, we read, "All of these things, the work, the service, and the gifts, are of one and the same Spirit. And He, God, distributes them to each one just as He determines." Now, what's the pattern that we're observing here? What is God inspiring Paul to see regarding the people that are in this church in Corinth? Well, I would argue that what we're seeing here is the wonder of the church. The wonder of the church. Paul looked around, he said, wait, God has gifted different people with different purposes. And so we can start to acknowledge that, but why? What is the point of all that? So we'll step back, rewind just a little bit. We see in the yellow, Paul wrote, "There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and everyone in the same God at work." What do we see? "Now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit, God in you and through you." What is it given for? It is given for the common good. And that's the common good through you, because ultimately God is for the common good. And so now things get interesting. Okay, it's God through you as a common good for people to experience good of God. And so ultimately what God is using us to get His goodness done. Now, if you look around at Odyssey Church, if you look around at each other, how I see it is that each of you at an individual level, and ultimately as a church as a whole, the goal here is a glimpse of God. People are here for the first time, get to see a glimpse of God in and through you. And we need to know that. It's the presence of God. Church is meant to be a glimpse of God. And there's lots of different conceptual observations of this throughout the Bible. We see God acknowledged incompletely through a variety of terms. One of them is to call God shepherd. God is our shepherd. At the time, historically speaking, that was a much more common term. I'd be surprised if any of you have ever met a shepherd before. but it's still easy to understand. God seen as shepherd. Okay, what does a shepherd do? He takes care of his flock. God takes care of us. He protects his flock. He takes care of us. He guides his flock to food and to water. God provides for us. But historically speaking, once again, if a shepherd was quite a familiar person in your life, you would also consistently see that a shepherd is just a guy. But God is not just a guy, right? And so again, it is an incomplete observation of who God is. And so inasmuch as we are a glimpse of God, we are also an incomplete version of who God is. And so how is God seen in and through the church? How is he seen in and through you at an individual level? I would argue today that it is the gifts that God has bestowed upon you, the different strengths that you have, the unique gifts, talents, and skills that you have. And that ultimately, all together, when you are a glimpse, and you're a glimpse, and you're a glimpse, and we come together, it is the greatest glimpse that people will ever experience when it's a gathering of followers of Jesus. Think of it this way. This is my favorite analogy for this, probably, actually. If God is a full movie, and we can capture him that way, you are the movie trailer. And if we tie it to movies like The Avengers, where there's like 12 different movie trailers for it, different versions for different reasons, but ultimately all a glimpse of the same movie, that's how it works through us. There's diversity in us, right? So we're all glimpses of the same movie.
That's good. That's good.
So we're meant to be a glimpse of God. Odyssey Church, you are a glimpse of God. You are arguably a wonderful glimpse of God. And so today we are going to continue to look around at each other for that glimpse, for the wonder in and through every one of us, and ultimately the mission of Odyssey Church. But having looked at you just a little bit more conceptually speaking, I want to move on to what it means to wander as a church. And it brings me back to that quote again, which I gotta ask, Zeb, did you write that? Or Zeb wrote it? Okay, cool. Yeah, dude, it's good. It's a good line. It starts with, we are a community of people from various cultures and backgrounds. Now we've acknowledged that's ethnicity, that's nation, that's creed, that's different jobs, that's different people, incomplete families even, but we might tie in after today, re-acknowledge or readmit the sheer fact that you all have different strengths and skills that you're bringing to the table. And so that is a various culture and background combination of what Odyssey Church is. What else does it say? What else did Zeb write under the inspiration of God and the calling to launch this church? Zeb writes, well, we are united in discovering the way of Jesus and practicing his teachings. So what are we looking forward to? Continuing to discover the way of Jesus, continuing to practice the way of Jesus. And so to wander as a church is to discover the way of Jesus and practice his teachings. And when that's your life, when you hold on to that dearly, your life changes. It cannot help but change. And a movement of change is a movement of stories. Each and every one of you are collecting stories. A story I wanted to share about how Haven Church has gotten started was one that I felt like God had casted a bow and just sent it right into my head because I needed it in a distinct moment that ultimately defined the next, at least 10, 15 years of my life. At the beginning of 2025, I kept getting this message from different people at different places at different times, over and over and over again, get out of the boat. And I was secure at the time. I was happy with where I was at. I had helped launch a thriving young adult community at Timberlake Church. Things were great. I am next week 2 years married. I was a little less than that back then, but I was happy I was married. And I said, well, wait a second, get out of the boat. That sounds like I gotta go somewhere. That sounds like I gotta have some faith to get into something new. It sounds like I gotta rock the boat to get out. And so I brought that message to some mentors, some friends, my wife, some pastors. I said, what does this mean? And what the heck? Nobody knew. And so I take that line, get out of the boat. I put it in my back pocket. And 5 months goes by. And within that 5 months, it's a long enough time to where the coincidences that occurred that had stacked up this line over my life, I'd forgotten. How many of us know that we just are so quick to forget? And it was enough time for such a drastic thing like that to even fall away from my memory. But then I find myself in a room with the executive pastors at Timberlake Church. And what they're telling me is, hey, Isaiah, we see you. We see what God's doing through you. We feel like you're called to launch a church. And as a young pastor, it's something you dream about, it's something you pray about, and it's something you push way out there and go, gosh, God, you tell me when, but maybe not yet. I don't know, what is... And so I'm anxious in that moment as they're trying to explain that they see this in me. And then the question comes that I honestly wish hadn't happened. One of the executive pastors leans over and he says, Isaiah, are you ready? And in that moment, it felt like 1,000 thoughts flashed before my eyes. Because I went, in a moment like this, I want to step back, I want to pray, I want to plan, I want to talk to people. I'm a researcher, I'm an academic, I have a master's in theology. Let me go talk to the scriptures, let me talk to the theologians from past times. But no, all of my anxiety, all of my worry in that given moment was trumped by this loud voice in the back of my head going, get out of the boat. Get out of the boat. And I didn't know it in that moment, but again, my response to that question of, Isaiah, are you ready? We are ready to send you. That moment, based on how I answered, has defined the next 10 or 15 years of my life. And it's something I could have tried to research, to plan, to prepare for, and everything too, to feel like I could surmise a reason to do it, but at a pivot point like that, God showed up and gave me the clarity that I needed, that this isn't about me. This is about a movement of God and seeking to be obedient to that movement of God.
Amen.
And that same movement of God resides over Odyssey Church. Still resides over Odyssey Church. Momentum, tides will change. Hold on to the truth that at the very beginning you can look back and see there's a distinct move of God. Even if it just started with a handful of people, God said, go. And so that's where we are at today. And so we're all collecting stories. But then sometimes it feels like our stories slow down when it comes to the Jesus stories. And it might be a moment of self-reflection for you. Wait a minute, when is the last time I feel like I really had a testimony to share of a way that God had moved in and through me? And if it's been a while, I would urge you to consider, is Jesus still at the center of your planning, of your expectations, of how you are expecting to move forward as you are continuing to wander through life? Is Jesus still at the center? And you don't need God to move once again to recenter him on your life. Instead, you already have stories. You can look back. If you already follow Jesus, you can say, okay, well, what got me here? That might be the testimony of you choosing to follow Jesus for the first time. And this is going to be kind of hard for some of you to hear, but it's something that God has instructed us to do, and it's to hold on to and be reminded actively of that testimony over our lives. I'm convinced, if you follow Jesus, if I put a statement on the screen that said what it means to follow Jesus, what the story looks like, and you could tie that into what God has done in your life, and if I said agree or disagree, many people in this room would confidently go, oh, I agree with that. But then the question is, regarding the story that you have, what you believe, can you take that and articulate it to someone else? Because that's when the stories start to get revived again, once again in your heart. Because as you hold on to what God has already done, stay reminded of it, that builds your faith once again, to share those stories once again. And as you are seeking out the obedience of sharing those stories with other people, you will change, and others will change around you. And then here comes the stories again. And it's a shift in mindset, because we can't be chasing stories for our own self-pleasure, just because we're anxious, just because we don't feel like God is close. That's not a reason to chase stories. The point of stories is that they're meant to be shared. And so we are taking ourselves out of the way and going, God, I'm seeking to remind myself of how you move so I can share it with others too. And this sentiment reminds me of one of my favorite verses in the Bible. It's in the book of Revelation, which always kind of goes, woo, we're going to talk about Revelation. And spoiler alert, I hope Zeb doesn't get mad about me. But if you want to hear more about Revelations, Zeb's going to be talking about it next week. So come back next week. It's the last book of the Bible. It's like, whoa, how do we talk about that? But this verse is prefaced by an author that was inspired by God to try to articulate what it looks like when the church, the movement of God, has triumphed over the spiritual other, the enemy, Satan. What did the church do, empowered by God, to triumph over the enemy? Well, we read in Revelation 12:11. They triumphed over him, the enemy, by the blood of the Lamb, it's just another name for Jesus, and by the word of their testimony. Those are your stories. And they did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Now that last line, a little intimidating at times, but ultimately is a faith that upon the persecution of death is held on to. And that could be meant in a literal sense, but upon today, and how I think it applies to the stories that we share, there is a death when it comes to chasing after stories for our own pleasure versus chasing after stories to share the goodness of God with others. And so there's a death to our selfish ambition, our selfish expectations that God might move to make me feel a little bit better. And instead, rather say, God, I know that you will fill me and fulfill me as we continue to move forward together. God, move so that I can share your love with others, because what you've already done in my life is enough, but I'm asking for more so that I can give more. As I was preparing for this message, I've been reading a book, and God always does this. He just tees up different wonderful and beautiful things to share, and I'm graced by the convenience of it. And so I wanted to share this line that I loved. The author writes, "We have a better story than any of the alternatives. We need to awaken a desire for God. We need to make people want Christianity to be true. Then we might be able to persuade them that it is true." Now, if I lost you at some point, ask to bring your attention back in as we close, just a few more notes. As we wander, the stories that we collect should be saturated in love. Let us expect more stories. God will grace you with more stories. But if they're not saturated in love, that's not Him. So as you look for more, expect God's love. And Paul even encourages the church that he was writing to in that chapter of Corinthians we read already. He's inspired by God to go, oh my gosh, look at the patterns and the different parts of how God moves through the church. This is so cool. Look at how each of you are made in special and different and unique ways. Cool. I'm a systems guy. That's cool. How can we combine each other to do awesome and great things? Mother Teresa even said, I have strengths that you don't have. You have strengths that I don't have. Together we can do great things for God. That is the case. But as we wander, the stories we collect from experiences of using our skills must be saturated in love. And so Paul encourages the church that he's writing to, and ultimately the church that is here today. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, this is right after the verses that we just read. I've created an abridged version for you. Paul writes, if I, ... And then he lines out some skills. Let me just give you some examples. If I am really good at serving the homeless, if I'm really good about engaging with people who are living in senior living homes, and for some reason in the Western Hemisphere people tend to forget about, if I have a heart to reach them, if I am a really good businessman and can make all the money in the world and I'm generous with it, if I'm a really good teacher, I don't think I'm that good. I think you got Zeb. Zeb's a great teacher. I don't know if I got something over you. Maybe arm wrestling. Maybe not. If I can do anything in a great way, but if I do not have love, then I am nothing and I gain nothing. If love is lost in your stories, then you've lost the plot. If love is lost in the movie trailer of your life that is meant to point to God, God isn't going to be seen through that movie trailer. We've got to hold on to love. So I want to simplify the experience of church just a little bit with an aim for love. Again, it's this wonderful book that God's given me. The quote goes, "We need to be communities of love, and we need to be seen to be communities of love. People need to encounter the church as a network of relationships rather than a meeting you attend or a place you enter."
It's good.
That's Odyssey Church.
Come on.
It's relationships, isn't it? It is the continued intentionality of saying, God, you are blessing me with stories. You're blessing me with personal experiences of who you are, and yet still you have equipped me to connect with others. You are a glimpse of God. This church is an even greater glimpse of God. But what is the product? Is it butts and seats? No. It is relationship. Relationship is the product of our faith. It is the product of our connection to God on a deep and spiritual level. My mom has since passed 8 months ago. And it's part of why it's the incomplete family that I have right now. She's a wonderful woman of God, and she's with the Father now, and something that she would tell me all the time, that she would pray with others. It's just this consistent line, so I want it to be a gift to you. As she would connect with people to build relationship, ultimately there would be a time that felt proper for prayer. And as she offered to pray for someone, and if they were receptive enough to say yes, she would never challenge them to pray in that moment. She would even offer to pray when she's at home if they would be willing to share a prayer request. But if she got that chance to ask them to pray with them in that moment, she would pray to God, God, pour out a more personal and loving relationship on them than they have ever experienced before. This is all about relationship. What does a relationship look like through you after today? Let it be a reminder we are a diverse movement of God. Everyone is welcome here. What's next? God has empowered you. And so now this is the point of which the academic in me has to come out. I'm going to ask that you write something down, because Zeb said it earlier, and it got me right in the heart. Church is not just Sundays. Church is every other day of the week too. We are summited back together to be inspired and encouraged by the body of Christ on Sundays. But starting on Monday, it is your challenge, it is your, I hope, encouragement after this message to apply what we've been talking about. And so I ask you, please, it's how our brains work, to write stuff down, to remember them. I've talked about the risks of forgetting. But if you would write one thing down, if you can claim that Odyssey Church is your home church, maybe it's time to look around again. Maybe you've forgotten the strengths of the people around you. If you're a father in the room, do you mind raising your hand? Let's bless the fathers in this room this week. Encourage them. Tell them what you see in them as the strengths and skills that they have that could honor God through relationships. Do that with each other. I'm confident, it's just how science works. If I put a bunch of you around one table just for an hour, I could come after that hour and say, hey, which one of you do you think needs to be the group leader? Which one of you do you think is meant to be the caretaker, who's looking out for everybody's hearts? Which one of you is the administrator, who's going to be doing planning? Which one of you is the hospitality person? When people come together, people fall into place. Maybe it's time to start looking around again and seeing what you've got. But also, upon acknowledging our strengths, maybe you've held on to that already tightly. Maybe that's not the reminder for you today. It's time to look ahead again. Odyssey Church is a movement of God. You are going somewhere. And so to recommit yourself in your heart and in your mind, is there sufficient evidence in you that you've seen at Odyssey Church, through the people that speak here, through the people that you meet here, that your mind is convinced we're going somewhere? Do you feel something when people speak? When you feel something when you talk to others in this room? Do you feel something when you hear the music that has convinced your heart, I can feel that it's right to be here? Today, do you need to make that recommitment that you know that Odyssey Church is your home church, and that all together you are going somewhere? But there's two groups in this room. Some of you acknowledge that Odyssey Church is your home church. Some of you, you're visiting today and you have a different church. I would acknowledge you do the same thing at your church. There are others in this room who might be ready to experience God's church for the first time. And to do that thing that the people in this room who are part of God's family are already doing, which is discovering Jesus and committing their lives to following Jesus, to find peace and purpose in church, which I promise you can find nowhere else. This church has a goal of being a glimpse of God for you. And so if you haven't experienced God's love just yet in church, I urge you to come back next week with the sheer fact that these people are focused on relationship and love. You will experience God's love through this church. And they're here because God has changed their lives. And I want to be clear. What we believe, the thing that I could put on the screen, is the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is the sheer belief that, well, three things. God is real. 80% of the world acknowledges that God is real. What we get to point to is that, well, the second thing, Jesus claims that he is God. And so we go, okay, I'm curious enough to check him out. He's made this claim, and he's also claimed that he's the way, the truth, and the life, and the only way to have a relationship with God. So that's a second step. But then, thank God, because the gospel is completed by the good news that Jesus made that claim and then proved his claim that he is God because he bore our sin, our wrongdoings, anything we have ever done, everything that we will ever do upon himself as he died on a cross. Died, but then rose from the dead 3 days later. That's not normal. That's a weird thing to believe. But him making the claim that he is God and then doing something like that ought to stir you up a little bit. And so we invite you to continue to explore this church. And if today, for the first time, you are curious enough to say, okay, I'm looking to discover who Jesus is, I want to invite you into a prayer that we're all going to pray together. Because again, church is a unification of diversity, acknowledging that we're a movement of God. And so if you are a believer of Jesus in this room, I ask you to just repeat after me. It is a prayer of salvation, a prayer of putting your trust in Jesus Christ as we close the message today.